Mother drops by son's school unannounced. What she finds a teacher doing leaves her outraged. It was just another regular weekday at school. Kids were laughing, trading snacks, chatting over plastic trays and juice boxes. The cafeteria buzzed with the kind of chaos only lunch hour can bring. No one noticed the woman quietly pushing open the heavy metal doors. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a staff member. She was a mom. Janelle stepped into the room, her heart pounding. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. No call to the office. No note in her son's bag. She just showed up. Something inside her said she had to. For the past few weeks, her 6-year-old son had been different, quieter, sadder. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. And today, she was going to find out why. She scanned the room, eyes darting from table to table, looking for her little boy's face. Normally, he'd be in the middle of a group, probably giggling, waving his hands as he told a story only he could finish. But today, he wasn't there. Her steps slowed, then she saw it. In the far corner of the cafeteria, tucked near a wall and away from the other kids, was a strange setup. A table, a tray of untouched food, and a child, her child, sitting alone. But that wasn't all. Surrounding him on all sides were tall cardboard panels. Someone had made a box around him, cutting him off from the rest of the room, like he was a problem that needed to be hidden. In front of him sat a big plastic cup, red letters slapped across the side, "Detention." Janelle stopped in her tracks. Her breath caught in her throat. That was her son. That was Daniel. He looked so small, so quiet. His back was hunched, shoulders curled in like he was trying to disappear. He didn't touch his food, didn't move, didn't even look up. A sharp pain bloomed in Janelle's chest. She stood there frozen, unsure if she was even seeing this right. This couldn't be happening. Her son, just 6 years old, was being punished. Not with a quiet timeout, not with a private talk, but like this. Put on display, isolated, ashamed. The noise of the lunchroom faded into a blur. Janelle could no longer hear the chatter, the forks, the teachers' voices. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart and the echo of Daniel's voice from the night before. "Miss Franklin doesn't like me." Now it all made sense. The sadness, the silence, the way he avoided her eyes. Janelle couldn't sleep that night. Even long after putting Daniel to bed, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words had echoed in her mind again and again. "Miss Franklin doesn't like me." And though he hadn't said much else, the sadness in his little voice was more than enough. It hadn't always been like this. Daniel used to love school. He'd come home every day bursting with excitement, talking about what he learned, the stories he heard, the numbers they counted. He was the kind of kid who got excited just reading the back of a cereal box. His teachers in the past had always praised how curious and polite he was. Janelle remembered the pride she felt when he came home with his first Star of the Week sticker. He had danced around the living room like he won a trophy. But lately, that spark had faded. It started small. Quiet dinners, shorter answers, less of the usual chattering about class. Then came the dragging feet in the morning, the sudden stomach aches, the silence in the car. She brushed it off at first. Maybe he was tired. Maybe it was just a phase. Kids go through that, right? But her gut said otherwise. One day, she noticed he hadn't touched the sandwich she packed him. That was odd. He loved peanut butter and honey. Then the next day, the same thing. His lunchbox would come back almost full. Not just the sandwich, everything. Even his favorite juice box. She asked him if he was feeling sick. He shook his head. She asked him if the food tasted bad. He shrugged. That wasn't like Daniel. He always had an opinion. Whether it was about dinosaurs, clouds, or what shape looked cooler, hexagons or triangles. He had something to say. But now, it was like he didn't want to talk at all. The tipping point came a few nights later. She was tucking him into bed, smoothing the blanket over his small frame, when she leaned in to kiss his forehead and noticed a tear roll down his cheek. "Hey," she whispered, brushing it away gently. "What's going on, baby?" Daniel turned, his face toward the wall. "Nothing, Daniel," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You know you can tell me anything. I'm always here for you." He hesitated, then finally whispered, "I don't want to go to school anymore." Janelle's heart clenched. "Why, sweetheart?" "Because Miss Franklin doesn't like me." He didn't say anything else. She didn't push. She just kissed his forehead and held him for a long time. But in her mind, something snapped. She had given that school her trust. She had trusted those teachers to treat her son with kindness, with patience, with care. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Her hands wrapped around the warm mug, her mind spinning. Daniel deserved better. Every child did. And if no one else was going to find out what was happening, she would. She didn't call the school. She didn't schedule a meeting. Instead, she took an early break from work the next day and got in her car. She didn't even tell Daniel she was coming. Janelle wanted to see it for herself, with her own eyes. Not some polished classroom visit, where everything was made to look picture perfect. She wanted the truth. And now here she was, standing in the cafeteria doorway, staring at her son boxed into isolation like a prisoner in front of everyone. No talking, no playing, no eye contact, just shame. Janelle felt heat rising to her face, her hands trembling at her sides. Her instincts as a mother roared to life. But before she moved, before she shouted or stormed over, something inside her said, "Watch, just for a moment. Let it sink in." Other kids walked past the box and giggled. Some pointed, some just stared. And Daniel? He didn't flinch. He didn't look up. It was like he had learned not to react, like this wasn't the first time. That's when the real heartbreak hit her. This had been happening, and he hadn't told her because he thought it was normal. Because someone had convinced him that this was what he deserved. And Janelle? She'd waited too long. She'd seen the signs, quietness, sadness, fear, and still tried to rationalize it. But now she knew. This was no misunderstanding. This was no bad day. This was something deeper, something ugly, something that had already begun to chip away at her son's spirit, and it had to stop. Today, right now. She took a deep breath and started walking toward him. Janelle didn't remember how her legs started moving. She only knew one thing. Her son was sitting alone in that box, and nothing else in the world mattered. The cafeteria seemed to stretch around her, buzzing with voices and footsteps, but everything felt distant, like she was underwater. Every breath she took was tight and heavy. Her heels clicked on the tile floor as she passed rows of chattering children. A few kids noticed her. A couple of teachers turned their heads, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. As she got closer, to Daniel, her stomach twisted. He was still looking down at his tray, barely blinking. His sandwich was untouched, his apple slices wilting. His fingers sat limp in his lap like he didn't even deserve to hold a fork. This wasn't a timeout corner. This wasn't quiet reflection. This was isolation. This was public shaming. She knelt beside him, eyes filled with worry. "Daniel?" she said gently. He didn't move right away. But when he finally lifted his eyes, the look he gave her nearly shattered her. They weren't just sad. They were ashamed. "Mama?" he whispered, confused. "What are you doing here?" Janelle reached for his small hand. "I came to surprise you, baby. I thought we could have lunch together. Her voice cracked despite her best effort to stay calm. "But what is this? Why are you sitting here like this?" Daniel's eyes darted around the room. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "I was talking too much," he mumbled, "so I had to sit here today." Janelle stared at the cardboard walls around him. They were taller than his head. Someone had gone to the trouble of cutting, folding, and taping them into a box. Just for him. Just to make sure he couldn't see anyone. Or that no one could. See him. And then that cup. That awful red plastic cup with the word detention staring back at her like a label. As if Daniel was some kind of warning to the other kids. Don't be like him, or this'll be you. Her jaw clenched. She stood up quickly, scanning the room. That's when she saw her. A woman with sharp eyes and neatly pinned hair walking toward them from across the cafeteria. Her expression flat, her mouth pulled into a straight, tight line. "Mrs. Thompson," the woman said, her tone clipped. "You're not scheduled for a classroom visit today." Janelle knew who she was before she even answered. "Miss Franklin," she said slowly. "So, you're the one who did this?" The teacher straightened, her arms folding across her chest. "Your son has been repeatedly disruptive. This is a disciplinary technique we use to help children understand consequences." "Consequences?" Janelle repeated, stepping slightly in front of Daniel. "You call this teaching consequences?" "It's a reflective space," Miss Franklin said. "Children who don't follow rules must face time away from their peers. It encourages accountability." Janelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. "He's 6, she snapped, her voice trembling. "He's not a criminal. He's a little boy who talks too much because he's excited. And your solution is to stick him in a box and humiliate him in front of his classmates?" Miss Franklin's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I assure you, this method has been used for years with consistent results. It's not personal." "Not personal?" Janelle said, her voice rising. "That's my child in there. It doesn't get more personal than this." Other students had gone quiet. Teachers were whispering to each other near the lunch line. Some of the lunch aides had frozen mid-step, unsure what to do. Daniel was now watching everything, his eyes, wide and frightened. Janelle turned back to him, her voice softening instantly. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You hear me?" Miss Franklin cleared her throat. "If we allow every child to break the rules, it disrupts the learning environment for everyone else." "No," Janelle said firmly. "What disrupts? Learning is making children feel like they're worthless. What's happening here isn't discipline, it's shaming. And it's not just wrong, it's dangerous." Miss Franklin opened her mouth again, but Janelle didn't let her finish. She reached forward and carefully pulled down the cardboard panel, folding it to the side. "Mama," Daniel said quietly, eyes darting nervously. "It's okay," she whispered. "No more hiding." She pulled down another panel. Then another. She stood up and picked up the red cup from the table, held it high where everyone in the room could see it. She stared at it, then crushed it in her hand. The plastic cracked loudly. She dropped it to the floor without saying a word. A silence fell over the cafeteria. Janelle turned to Miss Franklin, her voice calm but cold. "This ends now." Then she turned to Daniel, took his hand, and held it tight. And together, they walked out of the lunchroom, leaving the broken box and shattered cup behind them. The hallway outside the cafeteria was silent. Daniel walked beside Janelle, still, holding her hand tightly, his little fingers gripping hers like he was afraid to let go. Neither of them spoke. Janelle's heart was pounding, not just from what had happened, but from what she was about to do. Her whole body was buzzing with anger, but under that was something deeper. Sadness, and a growing determination that she could no longer ignore. She wasn't just going to leave and cry in the car. This time, she needed answers. She turned the corner toward the main office, Daniel still at her side. A secretary at the front desk looked up from her computer, surprised. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I need to speak to the principal." Now, Janelle said, her voice steady but sharp. The secretary blinked, sensing the urgency in her tone. Principal Watkins is in a meeting. Then interrupt him, Janelle said, cutting her off. It's about my son. It's urgent. There must have been something in her eyes, something that didn't leave room for argument, because the woman picked up the phone without another word. Within minutes, Janelle was sitting in a stiff chair, across from Principal Watkins in his cramped office, with Daniel sitting quietly beside her. His feet dangled above the floor. He was still too small for the adult-sized chairs. Miss Franklin was already there, waiting, her arms crossed, her expression tight with calm superiority. She didn't look at Janelle. She didn't look at Daniel either. Principal Watkins, a balding man in his early 50s, sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and awards. He gave Janelle a polite, almost rehearsed smile. Mrs. Thompson, he began. I understand there was an incident during lunch today? Janelle leaned forward slowly. What you call an incident, I call public humiliation. Ma'am, Miss Franklin started. No, Janelle interrupted, holding up her hand. You had your turn at the lunch table. Now it's mine. Principal Watkins shifted uncomfortably. Let's all stay calm. I am calm, Janelle said. And I'd like to know why my 6-year-old was boxed off from his classmates, made to eat alone behind cardboard walls, and given a big red detention cup like a warning sign. Miss Franklin jumped in. As I said earlier, Daniel has repeatedly disrupted class. We've tried verbal warnings. He talks out of turn, distracts others. He's 6, Janelle snapped, her voice rising for the first time. 6-year-olds talk. They get excited. They interrupt. That's not misbehavior. That's childhood. But he's been a consistent disruption, Miss Franklin said, her tone clipped. It's important that we teach boundaries. Boundaries? Janelle's voice quivered now, not from fear, but from barely held-in rage. Do you think sitting a child behind walls and separating him from everyone teaches anything but shame? Did you see him? Did you see his face? He wasn't learning anything in that box except that he's not wanted. The room was quiet. The principal finally cleared his throat and said, Mrs. Thompson, I understand how this may have looked. It didn't look like anything, she said. It was exactly what it looked like. Cruel, unnecessary, and targeted. Miss Franklin stiffened. Targeted? Yes, Janelle said. Let me ask you something, Principal Watkins. Do you keep records of which students are disciplined this way? We have behavior logs, he said slowly. Great, she said. Pull them. I want to see how many other children have been made to eat behind cardboard, and I want to know what they look like. Because I have a feeling this isn't happening to every child. Just the ones that don't fit. The principal hesitated. Those are serious accusations. I'm aware, Janelle replied firmly. I'm also aware that Daniel isn't the only black or brown child whose parents are scared to speak up, but I'm not scared. Not anymore. Miss Franklin turned sharply in her seat. I treat all my students equally. Janelle stared at her. Then explain to me why Daniel's disruption was met with isolation and humiliation, while another child's, say, a white child, might just get a warning or a quiet talk after class. Silence. The weight of that silence said more than any answer could. Principal Watkins finally sighed. Mrs. Thompson, I'll look into it. We'll review the disciplinary records and speak with staff. If there's any inappropriate conduct, no, Janelle said, standing slowly. Not if. There is. I saw it. And I won't wait for you to come around. I'll be speaking to the school board and the parents' council. I'll talk to the superintendent if I have to. Daniel looked up at her wide-eyed. He had never seen his mother like this before. Strong, steady, unshakable. And one more thing, Janelle added, turning to Miss Franklin. You're not teaching my son anything except how to feel small. That stops today. With that, she took Daniel's hand, looked Principal Watkins squarely in the eyes and said, "I hope you're ready, because I'm not the only parent who's going to have something to say about this." Then she walked out, her back straight, her grip firm around her son's hand. And as they left the office, Daniel, for the first time in weeks, smiled up at his mom. "Thanks for coming today, Mama," he said quietly. Janelle squeezed his hand. "Always, baby, always." Janelle didn't sleep much that night. Even after putting Daniel to bed, even after replaying every word from that meeting in her head, she couldn't quiet the storm inside her. She stared at the ceiling again, just like the night before, only this time she wasn't confused or scared. She was sure. There was something bigger going on, something more than just one teacher being harsh. The way Principal Watkins had hesitated, the silence when she asked about records, the look on Miss Franklin's face, like she'd done this before and never been questioned. No, this wasn't new. It had just never been challenged, not until now. The next morning, after dropping Daniel off at his grandmother's house, Janelle sat at the kitchen table with a pen and notebook, writing down everything, what she saw in the lunchroom, what Daniel had said over the past few weeks, the way he'd stopped eating, stopped smiling, stopped being himself. Then she circled one word in bold: why? Why her child? Why this method? Why was it okay? Then another question: who else? Because deep down, Janelle knew Daniel wasn't the only one. There were probably other parents, other kids, other quiet stories brushed under the rug. Maybe they didn't know what was happening. Maybe they were afraid to speak up. Maybe they thought no one would listen. Janelle decided to change that. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through the school's parent Facebook group. She typed a post and sat with it for a moment before hitting send. Has anyone else's child been made to sit alone in the lunchroom or behind cardboard walls as a punishment? I witnessed this happen to my son yesterday, and I'm deeply concerned. I'd like to hear your experiences. She wasn't sure if anyone would respond. She didn't expect much, but within 10 minutes, the replies started coming in. My daughter said something about a quiet corner last week. I didn't know what she meant until now. Yes, my son told me a boy in his class wasn't allowed to talk at lunch. He was sitting with a red cup too. This happened to my nephew. He's in first grade. They said it was to help him self-regulate. It happened to my daughter too, and she came home crying. She's only 5. Within an hour, Janelle's inbox was full. Parents of Black, Latino, Muslim, and neurodivergent children, all with similar stories, all sharing the same tone of sadness and confusion. Some were angry, some were ashamed. They hadn't spoken up earlier. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Daniel. It was about a system. By the next morning, Janelle had dozens of messages. Some parents asked to meet, others wanted to join her in confronting the school board. A few even admitted that they had tried raising concerns in the past, but nothing ever changed. That afternoon, Janelle invited a handful of them to her home. She made coffee, cleared the living room table, and welcomed strangers in like old friends. Mothers with tired eyes, fathers who looked like they'd just left work, a grandmother holding a folder filled with her grandson's behavior notes. And they all talked. They talked for hours. Stories poured out like water breaking through a dam. A boy punished for humming in class. A girl sent to the reflection area for asking to use the bathroom twice in one day. A child with ADHD constantly sent to the principal's office for moving too much. And then one parent, a tall woman with braids and soft eyes, said quietly, "I used to think it was just me, that maybe my kid really was the problem." Janelle looked at her and said, "So did I." That night, they made a decision. They weren't going to whisper anymore. They were going to be heard. They drafted a formal letter to the principal and the school board, demanding a meeting. They requested access to discipline records. Anonymized, yes, but enough to show patterns. They asked for a review of the school's behavioral policies and the immediate removal of harmful practices like isolation and public labeling. They also started a petition. The wording was clear and calm but firm. It called for reform, respect, transparency, and above all, dignity for their children. They posted it online that night. By morning, it had over 700 signatures. The local community was waking up. Teachers began sharing the petition privately. A counselor from another school reached out, thanking them for speaking up and sharing her own concerns. Even a few parents who had once defended the school's strict methods now began to wonder aloud. Is this what we really want our kids learning? That punishment is silence and shame? And in the middle of it all, Janelle kept checking on Daniel. Each morning, he still asked, "Do I have to go to school today?" And each time, she kissed his forehead and said, "Not yet, baby. We're working on making it a better place first." Because now it wasn't just about her child. It was about every child who had been made to feel small, invisible, broken. Janelle had lit a spark. Now it was starting to burn. By the time Saturday rolled around, Janelle's quiet living room had transformed into something that felt like a command center. Paper signs leaned against her couch. Markers were scattered across the dining table. Laptops were open on every surface. Parents, neighbors, even local community leaders filled the space, talking, planning, sharing stories. Every voice carried the same tone. This has gone on long enough. What had started with a single cardboard box around a 6-year-old boy had become something far bigger. A movement was growing, and Janelle, once just one worried mother, now found herself at the heart of it. Outside her window, cars lined the street. People arrived with folding chairs, bottled water, and snacks for kids. A woman from a nearby church offered her printer and made over 100 flyers that read, "Every child deserves dignity." The day of the protest had come. Janelle stood in her bedroom, looking in the mirror, her hands smoothing the front of her shirt. Not because she cared how she looked, but because she needed something to focus on. She took a long breath and picked up her handwritten notes. Downstairs, her son was sitting on the couch with his grandmother. He looked up at her and asked, "Are you gonna yell at people, Mama?" Janelle smiled. "No, baby," she said gently. "I'm going to speak up. That's different." He nodded, even if he didn't fully understand. She bent down and kissed his forehead. "We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to any other kid, okay?" "Okay," he said, holding onto her hand just a second longer. By noon, the street in front of the school was filled. Families held up signs. Education, not humiliation. Stop shaming our kids. No more boxes. Fair treatment for all students. Kids stood alongside their parents, some holding smaller signs, others just watching quietly. More cars kept arriving. What they had hoped would be a gathering of 20 or 30 people had grown into over 200. And then the cameras showed up. A local news van pulled up, followed by another. A reporter stepped out, mic in hand, eyes wide at the size of the crowd. She approached Janelle, who was standing near a folding table, nervously organizing sign-in sheets. "Are you the one who started all of this?" the reporter asked. Janelle looked around at the families behind her, at the children sitting on the curb, at her own son waving shyly from the sidewalk. "I started it for my son," she said. "But this belongs to all of us now." The reporter raised her mic. "Can you tell us what this protest is about?" Janelle nodded and spoke clearly. "Our children are being punished in ways that are meant to humiliate, not teach. Cardboard boxes, detention cups, isolation, especially children of color and kids with learning differences. We are here to say, enough. School should be a safe place, not a place where our children feel ashamed just for being themselves." Her words echoed through the crowd, There was a ripple of clapping. Someone shouted, "That's right!" The protest began to move. They walked peacefully around the front of the school, chanting together, "No more shame, no more fear. Let our children know we're here." Teachers watched through windows. A few waved. One even came outside to quietly say, "Thank you for doing this. We needed it." Then, something no one expected happened. A few students came out, not with signs, not with chants, but with their own stories. One girl, no older than 10, stepped up to the megaphone and said, "I was put in the box because I talked too much, but I was just trying to tell my friend her grandma was sick." Another boy said, "They gave me the red cup. I didn't even know why. Everyone stared at me." Parents wiped tears from their cheeks. These weren't statistics. These were children, right there in their own voices telling the truth. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, the protest had taken over the school's front lawn. News clips were already going viral online. People from other cities were commenting, "This happened to my daughter. My son came home with a detention cup too. Keep going. We see you. We support you." Later that evening, as Janelle sat on the floor in her living room, exhausted but filled with a strange energy, her phone rang. It was Principal Watkins. He didn't sound like the calm, in-control man she had faced days ago. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "the school board would like to meet with you and the other parents as soon as possible." Janelle leaned back against the couch, eyes closed, heart pounding. She opened them and looked at her son, now fast asleep with a blanket pulled to his chin. "Good," she said. "We'll be there." The next day, the school board released a public statement. "We are taking these allegations seriously and have begun an internal investigation. Effective immediately, all practices involving student isolation and visible labeling will be suspended. We are committed to reviewing our disciplinary methods with input from parents and educators." And then, at the end of the statement, "Miss Franklin has been placed on administrative leave pending further review." When Janelle saw it, she didn't cheer. She didn't jump up and down. She sat still, silent, not because it was over, but because it had finally begun. Change was no longer a wish. It was happening, right here, right now. And it started because one mother didn't ignore the silence in her son's voice, and refused to stay silent herself. Weeks had passed since the protest, but the energy hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. What began as one mother standing up for her son had become the heartbeat of a community. The hallway whispers were now open conversations. The silence was gone, replaced by questions, by voices, by action. The school board kept its word. A formal investigation into disciplinary practices began almost immediately. Janelle, along with several other parents, was asked to serve on a newly formed family teacher advisory panel. They didn't just want to hear her story now. They wanted her help in making sure it never happened again. At the first meeting, Janelle sat across from educators who had once dismissed concerns. But now, they were listening, really listening. She spoke clearly. Children need structure, yes, but they also need compassion. They need to feel seen and safe and supported. Discipline without dignity doesn't teach a child how to do better. It just teaches them that they are bad. And we're done with that. No one argued, they just nodded. Policy changes followed. Isolation as punishment was banned entirely. Public labeling, cups, boxes, color cards, all gone. Instead, the school shifted to a restorative approach. Conflict resolution, calm-down corners supervised by trained aides, and emotional coaching sessions. Miss Franklin never returned to her classroom. The investigation revealed that her disciplinary methods had been flagged more than once over the years, but never acted on. The school board decided not to renew her contract, citing misalignment with the school's values and expectations. In her place came someone new, a young teacher named Ms. Carter, full of warmth and presence. On her first day, she brought in a globe and asked the class, "Where is your family from?" Every student had a chance to share. She created a wall of photos and drawings called Who We Are. Daniel drew a picture of himself with his mom, holding a sign that said, "We are brave." For the first time in months, Janelle saw the light come back into her son's eyes. He smiled more. He ate all his lunch. He made new friends. One evening, he came running into the kitchen holding up a certificate. "Mama, I got Most Curious Thinker today." Janelle laughed, scooping him into a hug. "That's my boy." But the change didn't stop with Daniel. Other children started thriving too. One mother said her son no longer cried on the way to school. Another said her daughter, who once refused to speak up in class, now raised her hand every day. A colorful mural was painted along the hallway walls, a row of children of all backgrounds holding hands under bright skies, with bold letters that read, "Every child belongs." Daniel had helped paint one of the hands. He made it orange and gave it a smiley face. The school even introduced a new role, a diversity and wellness coordinator. Ms. Carter, with Janelle's help, created small group sessions called Circle, time talks, where students could share how they felt, learn about empathy, and understand how to solve problems without fear. And Janelle, the woman who once walked into a school lunchroom just trying to understand what was wrong, was now being invited to speak at educational conferences. Her voice was being heard across districts, even statewide. She never imagined herself standing on stages or being interviewed on the news. But now, when she stood in front of an audience, she always said the same thing first. This started with one lunch visit, one cardboard box, one child, and the courage to say, "This isn't okay." That spring, the school hosted a community open house. Families gathered to celebrate the changes. There were tables of food, student artwork, and small performances. Daniel sang a song with his class, a silly one about clouds and counting, but Janelle couldn't stop the tears from falling as she clapped. After the event, as they walked home hand in hand, Daniel looked up and asked, "Mama, are things better now?" She smiled and looked around at the parents chatting with teachers, at the children laughing freely, at the school glowing in the setting sun. "Better?" she said. "Yes, but not perfect. We're still working. We'll always keep working, because there are other Daniels out there, and other moms too." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Then he grinned. "Maybe one day I can help too." "You already have," she whispered, and she meant it. That one small voice, scared but honest, had cracked open a wall of silence. That one brave mother had turned anger into action. That one little classroom had become the start of something far bigger than anyone expected. It wasn't just about a box. It was about every child who had ever been made to feel small, every parent who had ever doubted their instinct, every teacher who wanted to do better, every voice that had been quiet for too long. And now, they weren't quiet anymore. They were seen, they were heard, and they were never going back.